everyone, and welcome to the thru Recovery Life podcast. Today we have Rich. Rich is dialing in all the way from Mexico. He is our speaker for today, sharing his experience, strength, and hope with us. So, Rich, without any further ado, please, you got it.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been sober since January 3rd, 1981. I got sober when I was 26, and I'm now 67. So that's about 2/3 of my life in AA. And what a gift to live a sober life. I grew up in this well-to-do family where I was supposed to be perfect, and I wasn't supposed to break any rules, which as a child who was a budding alcoholic, I figured out real fast that being perfect was damn near impossible. I figured out that I should act perfect when people were watching. Then I could act how I wanted when I was alone or with my friends. So at an early age, I learned how to act nice and I learned how to lie. I got drunk the first time in 7th grade. I wanted to be cool. Thought maybe if I did something edgy, maybe I'd be somebody like the cool kids. And so 2 friends and I went out and drank a 5th of vodka. 3 7th graders drank it straight from the bottle, 2 a.m. in an empty field. Well, I got sick, got caught, and got shamed. Shaming reinforced my belief that who I was wasn't good enough. I had to act nice because underneath my self-esteem was down in the gutter. I was so shamed that I didn't drink again for a couple more years. Instead, I acted nice. When I got into high school, my drinking started again. I got into a party crowd and we had fun. We had a blast. I felt like I was a part of something. And for those few years, drinking worked. But from that time on, I chased the good feelings I had when I was drinking in high school. Couldn't capture them again. It was in college that I got really serious about drinking, and as my drinking increased, my non-drinking friends started fading away, and my new friends were my drinking buddies. My life centered more and more on just getting drunk. Slowly, I began to feel apart from, disconnected, lonely in a crowd. Started having blackouts back then, too. Came out of one blackout driving my car in a cow pasture in the middle of a herd of cows with nothing on but my pants. I didn't think what just happened. I thought, how the hell do I get out of this damn pasture? My life was beginning to spin out of control. I lied and pretended everything was fine. But in reality, I was frequently broke, confused, and ashamed of the things I'd done. Around 1977, I was about 22, and I just graduated from college. I took 5 years during my 4-year degree, and I decided I was going to leave this small college town and I was going to go seek my fame and fortune. So I moved to Hollywood, California. Now, I expected movie stars, mansions, fancy cars, and that wasn't what I found. After that initial shock of the seedy reality of Hollywood, after that wore off, I pulled out the credit cards and bought trendy clothes and cleaned up my outsides. Because Hollywood didn't matter. I was going places. And I'd go out to the discotheques, I'd run Hollywood Boulevard and the Sunset Strip, wore the gold chains, trying to be like John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever. I thought I was so cool because I was out at the discos, dancing to Donna Summer and the Village People. In reality, I was just a drunk trying to impress somebody, driving this dented second-hand economy car, living in a dumpy neighborhood where at night the hookers would gather down at the corner and they'd bum cigarettes off me as I sat in my car waiting for the light to change. I got a job as a telephone operator, tried to act like it was just temporary. I kept thinking of my potential and how cool I was living in Hollywood, all the while ignoring the sleaziness that I was surrounded by. When I drank, I became someone to be envied, someone special. And when I sobered up, I worked to ignore the reality of my life. My life just wasn't working out, and I couldn't figure out why. I had this growing desperation that I was going to spend my life being a nobody who didn't accomplish anything. And when those thoughts and feelings came up, I'd drink them away. I was in a dead-end job going nowhere fast. Began to wonder what was wrong with the world. Here I was such a nice person full of potential, and no one was recognizing how wonderful I was. Feeling like I might have missed my opportunity, I'd drink. Eventually, started thinking maybe something mentally was wrong with me. Maybe my brain was defective. I kept trying and I kept failing. And I was always saying or doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. Well, my life in Hollywood, my parents were watching me and they were getting scared to death. They were afraid that Hollywood was going to destroy me. They didn't know half of what I was up to. One day they called me and they said, It doesn't look like things are working out that well for you in Hollywood. And we're wondering, what do you think about going to graduate school? And I was thinking, graduate school? What do I want to do that for? That's boring. That's not hip and cool and trendy. And so, being polite, I said, gee, I hadn't thought of that before. Don't know about graduate school. What an interesting idea. Then they said the magic words, we will pay your way. Yes, I was on board. Let's go to graduate school. What a good idea. Well, my dad was friends with the dean of admissions at a nearby university, so I was admitted, although I didn't quite qualify. The program was in public administration, and we were studying the 3 levels of government. I had no interest in it, but my ego liked saying I was a graduate student. And besides, I was getting a free ride in a new car. Last semester of school moved me to Washington, D.C., where I caught a bad case of Potomac fever. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Washington, Washington is located on the banks of the Potomac River, and a lot of people who arrive in Washington catch the fever. The main symptoms of the fever are this overinflated sense of self-importance and a big ego, and I caught it. I caught it bad. You know, I go walking down the street and the presidential motorcade would go flying on by. There were diplomats and embassies everywhere. My local news was your national news. I remember one time, went into the Four Seasons Hotel, this fancy hotel, went to use the restroom and ended up peeing next to the Attorney General of the United States. Well, I was on the verge of being somebody. I just knew it, surrounded by all this importance. Well, by December of 1980, I felt so close to being somebody that I decided I should go to President Carter's White House staff Christmas party. I hadn't been invited, but I was going to be important one day, so I'm sure they wouldn't mind. I talked my way past the Secret Service, and I started wandering through the White House. Now, I loved being around the power and importance in the rooms and the beauty of that place. I just knew this was my future. This was where I belonged. My ego was just flying. Started getting buzzed on the cheap wine they were serving, so I decided it was time to go because I didn't want to cause a scene. So I stumbled down the front steps of that famous building and headed out to my favorite bar, going to celebrate the glory that was going to be mine. Needless to say, it hasn't happened yet. Anyway, a few weeks later, there was a Friday night, January 2nd of 1981. Went out to one of my favorite bars. I'd skipped going out New Year's Eve because all the bars were charging a big cover charge with all the champagne you could drink, and I didn't like champagne. My drink was a double shot of tequila with a Kahlua floater. I'd order 2 at a time because, when I finished the first, I could reorder 2 more. And while I waited for the next 2, I'd finish off that second drink ready for the 3rd and 4th. I was never without a drink in my hand. Well, anyway, that Friday night, I ran into an acquaintance from school. He was drinking one of those stupid little bottles of Perrier, and I watched him watch me drink. I saw his face go from one of greeting to disbelief and then revulsion. And I had that moment of clarity. I saw that I couldn't stop drinking once I started. I knew that meant I must be an alcoholic. And the only thing I knew was that if you're an alcoholic, you go to AA. So I called AA and got directions to a meeting. That first meeting I went to was outside Washington in rural Virginia. I pulled up in the parking lot in the back door of the church. It had a bare light bulb hanging over the door. And I parked next to this rusty Cadillac, and I just had to steel myself. What the hell was I going into? And I entered a room full of old men wearing those old polyester leisure suits. I thought my life was over. I was 26. I was cool. Anyway, I thought maybe I'd do a month and get things under control. Then I'd leave these folks behind. I mean, they were nice and welcoming, but they weren't the crowd I wanted to hang with. Well, after the meeting, one of the men came up to me and told me that when he had first arrived in AA, someone had made a promise to him, and he was going to pass that promise on to me. He promised me that if I worked this program to the best of my ability and followed the suggestions, I'd never have to feel the way I did then ever again, and I'd be able to walk with dignity down any street in the world. But his promise has come true. Someone gave me a meeting directory and suggested some meetings that I might enjoy. The next night, I went to one and found people I wanted to be like, young, good-looking, dressed professionally. I got invited to coffee, was told to keep coming back, and most importantly, you remembered my name. I felt accepted and a part of, I felt welcomed. I wanted to stay a part of this group, so I cleaned ashtrays, put away chairs, took on service positions, and led meetings. I jumped fully into the program, got a sponsor, worked the steps, and began developing a spiritual relationship. The men told me stories I could never imagine sharing with another person, and their honesty gave me permission to start being honest about myself. I loved AA. Not only did I feel accepted, I felt liked and a part of. I got in the program, didn't just hang around the program. Eventually, my sponsor's help, I got a job waiting tables, and that led to another job and another job. I felt like my life was happening, and it felt good. Started gaining self-respect and self-esteem, finally beginning to feel like an adult instead of just a screw-up. One thing that happened during those early years, I've always remembered, there was this woman, she had 10, 12 years sober, and everyone looked to her like she was an old timer, and she had time, good sober. She shared that the night before she'd poured herself a drink and stood at the kitchen counter looking at it. And she was in such a state of despair that drinking had become an option. And after a few minutes, she poured the drink down the drain and called her sponsor. Well, I wondered what could have happened that after 10 to 12 years in the program, that drinking could become an option. I thought maybe that late the sobriety, that life be stable and wonderful. And I thought you'd be living the promises and everything be beautiful. Well, this is my first lesson, that recovery is a process and not a destination. Life keeps happening and we keep changing. I mean, when I work recovery, every day I wake up slightly different than the day before. And every day I face a world that's also slightly different than the one I knew yesterday. This woman's story told me that challenges can happen at any time to anyone. So staying in the program is absolutely necessary, or I might find myself standing at my kitchen sink with a drink in my hand. After I was in Washington for over 4 years and I was sober for 3, I decided I had enough of Washington's weather. I absolutely loved Washington, but the weather there is the worst, and I couldn't take it anymore. Washington had humidity, these thick clouds of pollen, freezing rain, slush, and sometimes all in one day. I was born and raised in California, so I didn't know a thing about weather. I had to get home where the days were all sunny and clear. Couldn't take it. So around 1985, I moved back to Hollywood. And once back in Hollywood, I didn't know anyone in recovery. Everyone I knew were drinkers and partiers, and they'd moved on. And back then, we didn't have cell phones, email, computers, or texting. I was essentially cut off from my sober support group. And I'd go to meetings, and I had trouble connecting with anybody, so I ended up on a dry drunk. I started acting nicer and nicer, trying to get people to like me, and I became less and less real. I was almost 4 years sober, and I was acting strange, and no one knew I wasn't always like that. No one knew I was on a dry drunk, least of all me. They only knew that I was kind of weird. I got greeted, but always left alone, and my life narrowed and the promises started to fade. Well, things came to a head for me one day when I went to a noon meeting on a weekend. After the meeting, I helped clean up the room, and I went outside to join the others on the sidewalk. And I approached the group and I said, hello. And they were very nice. And after a few minutes, they said, well, nice talking to you. We got to go. And they left. So I went over and joined the next group. And after a few minutes, they said, well, nice talking to you, but we have to go. Bye. So in group after group, I got the same response until I was standing by myself alone on that sidewalk. I remember watching that last person go down the street and turn the corner and leave me there. I felt like an unwanted nobody again. I was sober, but I was empty inside. I knew there was a God and that God loved me, but what was I supposed to do? Well, I went home, despondent and dejected, and all I knew to do was pray for a solution. I came across a quote recently by Bill Wilson in As Bill Sees It, and it said, and I'll quote here, "Is sobriety all that we are to expect of a spiritual awakening? No, sobriety is only the bare beginning. It is only the first gift of the first awakening. If more gifts are to be received, our awakening has to go on." Well, I'd reached a point where my awakening had to go on. My choice was to grow or go. I chose to grow. During my time in AA, I'd heard so many people share how the promises had come true for them, and that they were happy, joyous, and free, and their lives were working out. Well, I knew my higher power had to want that for me too. So I made a decision to find that recovery no matter what it took. I was going to do whatever I had to because I knew happiness was possible through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And because of my time in AA, knowing the program worked, I found hope. Well, I prayed and meditated, asking my higher power for guidance, I started driving to other AA meetings all over the Southern California area. I read a lot of recovery books. I joined other programs, got into therapy. I did service, anything to find my recovery. I was willing to go meditate on some distant mountaintop with a spiritual guru if it would have helped fill that hole in my gut. I wanted those promises, and I wanted them in spades. I was done working this program to please you. I wanted this program to work for me. You see, up until that moment, I'd been seeking out meetings that would validate who I wanted to be. Now I started seeking out meetings that not only accepted me for who I was, but supported and encouraged my work to become who my higher power meant for me to be. In those meetings, I found a sponsor who worked a program. I started getting honest again, and my life began to stabilize. I slowly came off that dry drunk, started becoming a real person instead of an image of who I thought you wanted me to be, and it felt good. By seriously working the program, the promises started to come true again. And not only did they come true, they kept growing deeper, more intense the longer I worked every aspect of my recovery. As I worked the steps again, I realized that the traditions and the concepts also had recovery in them, not only for the groups and the fellowship, but for me. So I worked them as well, looking for how I could translate them into my daily life. So I now had 36 tools to further my recovery, to help me become a better person, to help me become the type of adult I always dreamed of being. Well, after a couple of years, my sponsor died. Well, I got another sponsor. He was a real nice guy. But this time I got a sponsor who wasn't as focused on the program, got a sponsor who was more hands-off, sponsor who didn't catch my growing ego, didn't see my growing distance from the core of the program, didn't see me reverting to that two-dimensional image of whatever you wanted me to be instead of who I really was. And for the next 11, 12 years, I worked the program by going to meetings, but I didn't pay much attention to the steps. I'd done them, so why do them again? The externals of my life improved. I got money, property, and prestige. I fashioned myself into this AA success story, got a nice condo overlooking Beverly Hills and a new personal luxury car. I was talking the talk, but not walking the walk. And underneath, there was this feeling of discontent that I covered with a lot of service and more meetings. I stayed busy so I didn't have to feel. Well, one night, I was attending my home group meeting, and we got to the secretary's report. And when the secretary asked if there were any announcements, there was a pause, and then every single person in that room turned around and looked at me. Yeah, I was stunned. I didn't have any announcements. I had that moment of clarity. I saw that I positioned myself as an AA elder statesman, that I was no longer an equal member. I'd grown an image I had to uphold, and that kept me from being honest. By not continuing to work the steps and only working parts of the program, my ego had separated me from you and from my higher power. I was presenting this image of a recovered old-timer with a solid sobriety who had arrived, instead of being a human being on a path of continuing recovery. My ego wanted to be somebody, and I had been acting the part. I wanted recovery to be a destination, and I wanted to have arrived. Well, the shock of that night, of what I'd become, it drove me back into working the steps. And as I worked through the steps again, I paused at the fifth step because I was feeling my fear rising again. I wanted to be perfect, and I recognized that old familiar fear of shame and rejection. If I told anyone who I really was, I judged myself for needing to do the steps again when I was supposed to be perfect. I didn't want to have to keep doing work. I wanted to arrive. I wanted to be perfect and done. And then I thought about all the times I had fear about working the steps, of making my amends, of not being welcomed in AA. I had a lot of fear. Then it dawned on me that what counts are the results, and I had those. I remembered how freeing it was when I did my first fifth and ninth steps, and how good it felt to do a seventh step, knowing that God was there for me. I looked back at the step work I was doing and got into gratitude for the results. I was going to see the results, and the fear retreated. When I got to step 11, it was like this window shade was pulled. Step 11 says we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Well, when I read sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, well, I thought conscious contact to me means communication, and prayer's talking and meditation's listening. Yeah, I used to meditate by reading something and then thinking about it. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried talking to somebody who won't shut up. Well, can you imagine how frustrating it must have been for God trying to communicate with me, and my mind won't stop thinking, won't shut up? And I realized it was through quiet meditation that I not only strengthened my conscious contact, but also there was the channel of communication with my God. Prayer is my avenue for communicating with my higher power. And in that space created by quiet meditation, that's where my higher power can communicate with me. Then the 11th step goes on to say, we're praying only for knowledge of his will for us. Well, I suddenly realized that maybe God's will for me, those are my dreams and my ambitions and my desires. And my dreams are God's gift to me. And when I work to fulfill those dreams, I can give gifts back to God. My higher power not only wants me to achieve my dreams, my higher power wants me to be happy, joyous, and free, as well as being grounded, whole, and complete as a person. And as I followed my dreams, as they presented themselves to me, those dreams evolved and started forming a path. I just prayed for guidance and kept taking action to the best of my ability, working to heal whatever lessons crossed that path. Eventually, the path got narrower and clearer. It's through my life events that my higher power leads me, helping me fulfill his will for me. And the power to carry that out? Well, that includes my being willing to do the work to repair the beliefs I learned during my life that distort my intuition and warp my decisions. I have to take all my mistakes and missteps and make them into opportunities for growth. I have to have the willingness to do what I have to do to become the person God needs me to be to fulfill God's will for me. I know that alcoholism is cunning, baffling, and powerful. It's also patient. I've seen enough people with time relapse, so I keep going to meetings, working the program, and working with others so that doesn't happen to me. And today, I don't work a perfect program. I mean, other than not drinking, I've never worked a perfect program. I had one sponsor once looked at me and said, quote, "Rarely have we seen a person who has thoroughly followed our path." One thing I have done repeatedly, however, is taken responsibility for my own recovery. While I do seek out wise counsel, I'm the only one who will pour that drink down my throat. I'm the only one who's responsible for my recovery, and I have the ability to not drink one day at a time. I have the ability to recover in this program. I have the ability to become who God wants me to be, and it's happy, joyous, and free. In this program, I've been sober and I've been dry, wise, stupid, arrogant, humble, all those things. But once I get stable in my recovery, life comes along and I have more work to do. But eventually I do it, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. I have to keep working in my recovery so I can become the person God wants me to be. I just have to be willing and work to the best of my ability. My higher power will guide me if I ask for direction. I've been sober now for 41 years. And, if I look back on those 41 years, in spite of everything that's happened, every consecutive year has been better than the year before. And that's one hell of a trend. Each year, as I work the challenges of life, I find myself becoming more spiritually centered, more emotionally grounded, less susceptible to the external crap that used to disrupt my serenity. By working this program, I become an adult who can fully participate in this world as an equal. I heard a saying recently that courage is fear that prayed. Well, I'm going to pray that we all find courage when we feel fear, that we find the courage to make that phone call when we're afraid we might take a drink, courage to overcome the fear of doing our 5th and 9th steps. And above all, I'll pray that we all have the courage to continue working all aspects of this program so we can become the people we were meant to be. I am so grateful to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for all the gifts of my sobriety, and especially for the gift of hope in the sober adventure that's become my life. Thanks for letting me share. Thanks, John.
Rich, fantastic. And where do you live in Mexico, Rich?
I am in central Mexico, a little south of Guadalajara, little town called San Antonio Tlacopan.
And how long have you been there? What made you move to Mexico?
Well, I was going along and I had a bunch of stuff happen. I got laid off from my job and when I was 62. And I looked around and said, if we leave Southern California, we can afford to retire. And we had a friend who said, why don't you move to Mexico? So I got on the internet and said, where do you go in Mexico? And it said, go here. So we flew down and in 1 week we rented a house, sold our house, moved, And here we are. We decided just to go on an adventure. And that's been 5 years now we've been down here.
That is outstanding. I know someone who lives in Cancun. He's been there for over 20, maybe 30 years.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
The adventure of life.
All right, Rich, I appreciate you taking the time for us today. And see you soon. Have a great day.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate your time. Bye-bye.